When I finally refused to commit financial fraud to save my brother's reckless lifestyle, my mother shoved me through a glass coffee table. I drove away bleeding that night and never looked back. Now they're facing federal indictments and begging for my help. My older brother Marcus is the undisputed golden child. While he was handed the world on a silver platter, I was treated as the family's unpaid accountant and legal fixer. That wasn't a metaphor. Starting at 14, my parents forced me to manage the books for their landscaping business in Phoenix. We're talking real numbers and real liabilities. I was sitting at the kitchen table after school with a cheap calculator, reconciling bank statements that smelled like fertilizer and diesel, preparing payroll for 22 employees, and dodging angry vendors on the phone when our accounts were overdrawn. Marcus's only responsibility was practicing his golf swing. He had this set of custom clubs that cost more than a reliable used car. When I complained about missing high school dances to balance spreadsheets or figure out why our state tax remittance was short, my mom always gave me this patronizing little pat on the shoulder. Marcus is a creative visionary, she'd say, staring out the window at him chipping balls into a net. You're the detail-oriented one. That was code for me cleaning up his nightmares. It became the template for our entire adult lives. By 24, I was working full-time at a logistics firm, a real job, with my own boss and my own benefits, while still spending 40 hours a week untangling my family's financial disasters. I'd clock out of my actual job at 5, drive to their office in a strip mall off Camelback Road, and sit under flickering fluorescent lights until midnight. Marcus got a $75,000 salary from the landscaping business despite never setting foot inside. He spent it on bottle service at clubs in Old Town Scottsdale and leased luxury cars. He went through a matte black SUV, then a sports car, tossing the keys on the kitchen counter at Sunday dinners, while I sat there silently recalculating the depreciation schedules my parents would illegally try to write off. The breaking point hit when I turned 26. Marcus decided he was too good to just be a passive drain on the landscaping company. He was going to open a streetwear boutique downtown. He blew through a $120,000 business loan in 4 months and instantly defaulted. I only found out because I was auditing the family ledgers late on a Tuesday night. The office was quiet. The air conditioning was humming. I was scrolling through the master operating account, trying to figure out why the payroll reserve was dangerously low. Then I saw them. Massive wire transfers being routed to a commercial landlord I didn't recognize. 10,000 here, 15,000 there. My stomach dropped. I pulled the raw bank statements. My parents had been secretly draining their own company's operating account to keep Marcus's sinking ship afloat, and they were completely out of cash. The landscaping business was technically insolvent. They couldn't make payroll on Friday, but stealing from their own business wasn't enough. They needed a new lifeline, and their credit was already tapped out. On Thursday evening, my mom called an emergency family meeting in their living room. When I walked in, still wearing my work clothes, the atmosphere was thick. A local loan officer was sitting on their oversized leather sofa with a thick stack of paperwork on his lap. He looked uncomfortable. I later learned his name was Griffin Calloway, a guy who approved high-risk secondary loans. My mom smiled at me. It was that tight, desperate smile she used when she was trying to manipulate a vendor into giving us 30 more days to pay an invoice. She pushed a heavy silver pen across the mahogany coffee table. "We just need you to co-sign this $200,000 personal guarantee, honey," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Your credit score is perfect. Marcus just needs a little runway to turn a profit." I picked up the document and scanned the fine print. The words blurred for a second before snapping into sharp, terrifying focus. They had already listed my personal home address, my savings accounts, and my logistics firm salary as collateral without asking me. They had literally typed my life onto the lines of this loan agreement. I looked up at her. "You want me to risk my entire future for Marcus's failed shoe store?" My mom's fake smile vanished instantly. Her face hardened into a mask of pure entitlement. "It's not a risk. It's your duty to this family. Stop being difficult and sign the paper." I looked over at Marcus. He was slouched in a velvet armchair, busy scrolling through Instagram on his phone, utterly unbothered by the fact that he was asking me to mortgage my financial life. He didn't even have the decency to look me in the eye. "No," I said loudly. The word echoed in the living room. "I am not going bankrupt for him. I'm done. You ungrateful brat." My mom screamed. The sudden volume made Griffin flinch. She lunged across the seating area to grab the pen and force it into my hand. But she didn't stop there. When I pulled my hand back, she lost her temper completely. She violently shoved me backward with both hands. My heel caught the thick edge of the Persian rug. I tripped, my arms flailing, and crashed backward into their heavy glass coffee table. The sharp corner clipped my right shoulder blade, tearing through my shirt. The glass top cracked loudly under my weight, a sickening spiderweb fracture shooting across the surface. I lay there stunned. A deep, warm gash opened on my shoulder, the blood instantly soaking the fabric of my shirt. The pain was sharp and blinding. Marcus finally looked up from his phone, annoyed by the sudden noise. Not concerned, annoyed. My mom stood over me, panting heavily, her fists clenched at her sides. She looked at the blood, then looked at the broken glass. "Look what you made me do," she hissed. I didn't say a single word. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The absolute clarity of that moment was freezing cold. I pulled myself up from the debris. I felt the blood trickling down my back, warm and wet. I walked past the terrified loan officer, out the front door, and got into my car. I drove straight to an urgent care clinic on 44th Street, where I sat in a sterile white room and received 7 stitches from a nurse named Petra, who asked if I needed to call the police. I told her I fell. I blocked all my parents' phone numbers in the parking lot of that clinic. I blocked Marcus. I blocked the business line. The next month, I moved out of my duplex and into a secure high-rise apartment on the other side of the city. I used the thousands of dollars I was no longer bleeding into their accounts to pay the deposit. For 6 quiet months, I heard absolutely nothing. No apologies, no wellness checks, just the absolute, suffocating silence of a family that only valued me for my utility. Then, the federal audit letters started arriving at their house. Without me cooking the books and managing the ledgers to hide Marcus's blatant embezzlement, the whole house of cards collapsed. They didn't know how to categorize the missing funds. They didn't know how to file the quarterly taxes. A massive ears investigation was triggered. My dad left 4 frantic voicemails from a blocked number last Tuesday. I listened to them while sitting on my couch. He sounded small, breathless, panicked. He begged me to come back and reorganize their financial statements because their bank accounts were frozen, and Marcus was facing potential tax evasion and wire fraud charges. He actually had the nerve to say my mom was highly stressed and willing to forgive me for breaking her expensive table if I came over to help. I laughed out loud in my quiet, perfectly peaceful apartment. I didn't return the call. Instead, I poured myself a glass of expensive wine and sat on my balcony overlooking the glowing city skyline. I told myself I was out. I told myself I am not their accountant, I am not their human shield, and I am definitely not going to be their legal accomplice. They always wanted a visionary son, and now they get to experience exactly what his grand vision looks like when the federal government finally turns on the lights. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I had cleanly severed the infected limb and the rotting would stop at their doorstep. But yesterday afternoon, the receptionist at my logistics firm buzzed my desk. She said there was someone in the lobby asking for me. Not a vendor, not a delivery driver. A woman in a gray suit who had just flashed a federal badge. I walked out to the reception area, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. The woman was standing by the glass double doors, holding a sleek leather briefcase. "Are you the former bookkeeper for Oasis Landscaping Solutions?" she asked. Her voice was flat, professional. "I'm not affiliated with that company anymore," I said, keeping my distance. She reached into her pocket and handed me a plain white business card. The seal of the Internal Revenue Service was printed in the corner. Her name was Special Agent Sloan Wyndham, Criminal Investigation Division. "I understand that," Sloan said, looking at me with eyes that missed absolutely nothing. "But your signature is on a series of amended tax returns filed 3 weeks ago. Returns that attempt to reclassify over $300,000 of personal expenditures as deductible business losses." I stared at the card. The lobby felt completely devoid of air. "I haven't spoken to my family in 6 months. I didn't sign anything." "That's what I suspected," Sloan said quietly. She didn't sound threatening. She sounded like someone who had seen this exact scenario 100 times before. "But your mother provided a notarized affidavit stating that you were acting as their shadow accountant this entire time, directing the transfer of funds. She claims Marcus was just following your financial advice." The cold reality washed over me. They weren't just drowning. They were actively trying to pull me under to cushion their fall. My mother hadn't just forged my signature. She had weaponized my entire history of helping them to frame me as the architect of Marcus's fraud. "I need you to come down to the federal building tomorrow morning," Sloan continued, handing me a thick manila envelope. "Bring whatever documentation you have, because right now, on paper, you're the one holding the bag." I took the envelope. It felt heavy, too heavy for just a few standard tax returns. Sloan didn't offer a sympathetic smile or a reassuring nod. She just turned on her low heel and walked out through the glass doors, disappearing into the blinding Phoenix afternoon. I stood there in the lobby for a full minute, my fingers gripping the brown paper so tightly my knuckles turned white. Soren, one of the senior dispatchers, walked past on his way to the break room and gave me a weird look, but I just turned and walked back to my desk. I didn't sit down. I dropped the envelope on my blotter, broke the metal clasp, and tipped it upside down. A stack of photocopied documents slid out. They were all EARS forms, Form 1040s, Schedule Cs, amended returns for the last 3 years. I started flipping through them, my eyes scanning the bottom of each page. There it was, my signature. It wasn't a sloppy imitation. Either my mother had clearly dug up old payroll checks or college aid applications from the filing cabinets in their home office. She had traced my distinct loop on the first letter of my name perfectly, but she had made one arrogant mistake. She dated the most recent amended return for March 14th. March 14th was exactly 2 weeks after she shoved me through the glass coffee table. 2 weeks after I had changed my number, moved my money, and vanished. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. They were trying to put me in federal prison to save Marcus's country club lifestyle. The absolute audacity of it took my breath away. She hadn't just thrown me under the bus, she had carefully strapped me to the chassis. I packed up my laptop, told my manager I had a family emergency, and left early. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't pour any wine. I didn't sit on the balcony. I went straight to my home office, opened my fireproof lockbox, and started pulling out everything I had. My lease agreement for the new apartment, my bank statements showing the exact hour I severed the joint accounts, my new cell phone contract, and most importantly, the discharge paperwork from the urgent care clinic. I laid it all out on my kitchen island. The timeline was airtight. I had ceased all contact and physical proximity to their business operations a month before these fraudulent returns were filed. But I knew that wouldn't be enough to satisfy a federal agent like Sloan Wyndham. I needed to prove they were the ones actively moving the money. I needed to show their desperation. Around 8 p.m., my phone buzzed on the granite counter. It was a text from an unsaved number. "Hey, it's Marcus. Dad said you're dodging his calls. We really need to talk. Mom is a mess. Just call me back, okay? Don't be a dick about this." I stared at the screen. The sheer delusion of my brother was almost fascinating. He was staring down the barrel of a federal indictment, and he still thought he could text me like I had just borrowed his favorite hoodie without asking. I didn't reply. 3 minutes later, the phone rang. Same number. I should have let it go to voicemail. Every legal instinct in my body screamed at me to hit ignore, but the anger simmering in my chest overrode my logic. I picked it up and hit accept, not saying a word. "Hello?" Marcus said. He sounded breathless, like he was pacing. "Look, I know you're pissed. I get it. The table thing was out of line, but you need to come down to the house." "I'm not coming anywhere near that house, Marcus," I said. My voice was eerily calm, even to my own ears. "You have to," he snapped, the entitlement flaring up instantly. "The bank froze the boutique's accounts. They froze the landscaping accounts. My rent is due in 4 days, and I literally can't buy groceries groceries. Dad's talking to some cheap lawyer who doesn't know what he's doing. You're the one who knows how the books work. You can explain the transfers to the auditors. The transfers were embezzlement. Marcus, you and Mom stole from the operating account to fund a failed shoe store. It was a business loan. He shouted, his voice cracking. Mom said we could reclassify it as a marketing expense. She said you already handled the paperwork. I froze. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. What did you just say? Mom said you filed the paperwork to reclassify the seed money, Marcus repeated, sounding less confident now. She told the ears lady that you were the one who suggested it. That's why they need to talk to you. You just need to tell them it was a legitimate strategy. You can fix this. You always fix this. The pieces clicked together with sickening precision. My mother hadn't just forged my signature on the tax returns. She had actively coached Marcus to throw me to the wolves. She convinced her golden child that I was the mastermind, insulating both of them. Marcus, I said, leaning over the kitchen island and looking at the urgent care bill for my stitches. I haven't touched those books in 6 months. I didn't file anything. Mom forged my signature on federal tax documents. There was a long, heavy silence on the line. I could hear a siren wailing somewhere in the background on his end. No, Marcus said finally. His voice was completely flat. No, she wouldn't do that. She showed me the copies. Your name is on them. She traced it, I said, because she knew the ears was going to find out you blew $100 grand on a fake business, and she needed a scapegoat to keep you out of jail. So she picked the child she actually despises. You're lying, he said, but he didn't sound angry anymore. He sounded terrified. You're just trying to scare me because you're mad about the coffee table. I'm going to the federal building tomorrow morning at 9, I told him. I'm bringing my bank records, my new lease, and the medical records from the night Mom assaulted me. I'm going to sit down with Special Agent Sloan Wyndham, and I am going to tell her exactly how the landscaping business actually operated. Don't, Marcus whispered. It was the first time in my entire life I had ever heard my older brother beg. Please, if you do that, they're going to arrest me. The lawyer said if the reclassification isn't valid, it's wire fraud. Please, we're family. We were a landscaping company, I corrected him. You just thought we were family. I hung up the phone. I didn't block this new number immediately. I wanted the silence on his end to marinate. I wanted him to sit in his empty, expensive apartment with no money in his account and realize that the creative visionary was finally out of runway. But as I was gathering my paperwork to put it in a neat, organized folder for Agent Wyndham, another thought struck me. A cold, creeping realization that made my hands stop moving. If my mother was willing to forge federal tax returns and swear a false affidavit to frame me, what else had she put my name on over the last 6 months? I opened my laptop and pulled up my credit monitoring dashboard. I hadn't checked it since I signed the lease for my new apartment, feeling secure in the fact that I had frozen my main credit files. But there are secondary reporting agencies. There are high-risk lenders who don't always check the big 3 bureaus. People like Griffin Calloway, the sleazy loan officer who was sitting in our living room the night my shoulder was sliced open. I paid the expedited fee to pull a comprehensive, deep background credit report. The loading wheel spun on my screen for what felt like an eternity. When the page finally populated, my perfect credit score was gone. It had plummeted by nearly 200 points. I scrolled down to the active accounts section, my heart thudding in my throat. There, sitting right at the top of the list, was a high-yield commercial line of credit originated by a private lending group. The balance was entirely maxed out, $250,000. The origination date was 4 days after I left the house bleeding. She hadn't just framed me for the tax fraud. She had gone back to Griffin Calloway, forged my signature on the personal guarantee I had explicitly refused to sign, and taken the money anyway. And now, that private lending group was preparing to come after me for $250,000 I never saw. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred into a meaningless gray smudge. $250,000. It wasn't just a loan, it was a financial execution. The interest rate listed in the margin was a predatory 19%. They hadn't just drained the landscaping business and Marcus's fake shoe store. They had actively hollowed out my future to buy themselves a few more months of pretending they were rich. I printed the credit report. The printer groaned in the quiet of my apartment, spitting out the pages of my ruined financial life. I took the sheet with the Vanguard Oasis Capital account and laid it on the kitchen island next to the fake heirs tax returns and my urgent care discharge papers. It looked like a museum exhibit dedicated to my family's betrayal. There was a 1-800 number listed next to the delinquent account status. I didn't wait until morning. I picked up my phone and dialed. A tired-sounding customer service representative named Reese answered on the third ring. I gave him my social security number, my heart pounding against my ribs, expecting him to tell me I was unauthorized. Instead, he cheerfully verified my identity and told me the account was exactly 62 days past due. I didn't authorize this line of credit, I told him, keeping my voice perfectly level. I need you to email me the complete origination file, the signed contract, the personal guarantee, everything. Reese sighed, the sound of a man who dealt with panicked debtors all day. I can send the PDF to the email address on file. Give me 1 second. Wait, I said sharply. What email address is on file? He read it back to me. It was an old AOL email address my mother used for the landscaping company's vendor inquiries. She had hijacked all the correspondence so I would never see the billing statements. I gave Reese my actual email address, answered 2 more security questions that my mother had lazily set as my high school mascot and my birth city, and waited until the notification chimed on my laptop. I opened the encrypted PDF. It was 40 pages of dense legal text, but I scrolled straight to the signature lines on the personal guarantee. There it was. My forged signature, traced perfectly again in blue ink, but it was the stamp next to it that made my blood run cold. It was a thick black notary seal. Declan Thorne, Maricopa County. I knew Declan. He owned the heavy equipment rental yard off Interstate 17 that my parents used for the landscaping business. My dad owed him tens of thousands of dollars in back rental fees for skid steers and dump trailers. Declan was notorious for cutting corners, and apparently, stamping a fraudulent $250,000 loan guarantee for my mother was the price for keeping their business relationship alive. She didn't just panic and sign a piece of paper in her kitchen. She had driven to a commercial lot, sat down with an accomplice, and committed a coordinated felony. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen island, watching the city lights switch off one by one, drinking black coffee, and organizing my evidence into 3 distinct manila folders. One for the ears, one for Vanguard Oasis Capital, and one for a lawyer. At 7:00 a.m., I didn't go to the federal building to meet Special Agent Sloan Wyndham. I knew better than to walk into a federal interrogation room unrepresented, no matter how innocent I was. Instead, I drove to a sleek glass office building in Biltmore. I had spent 3 hours researching corporate fraud defense attorneys, and I walked into the lobby exactly when the doors unlocked. Cora Fairfax was expensive. Her retainer was $10,000, which was half of the liquid cash I had saved since cutting off my parents. She sat across from me at a massive glass conference table, looking over the forged tax returns and the fraudulent loan guarantee. She didn't show an ounce of surprise. She just tapped her gold pen against the notary stamp. "Your mother has trapped you in a very specific legal corner," Cora said, her voice dry and pragmatic. "If you go to the IRS today and try to explain this away, they won't care. To them, your name is on the tax fraud. To the secondary lender, your name is on the debt. I have the urgent care records," I argued, pushing the hospital bill toward her. "I wasn't even speaking to them when this was filed." Cora shook her head. "Circumstantial. You could have signed the documents beforehand. You could have been communicating through a burner phone. The federal government doesn't deal in family drama. They deal in paper. And right now, the paper says you owe $250,000 and you lied to the government about $300,000 more. So how do I fix it?" Cora stopped tapping her pen. She looked me dead in the eyes. "You don't fix it. You destroy it. You have to file a formal police report for identity theft and criminal fraud against your mother and Declan Thorne. Today, you have to swear out a complaint that she forged your signature and stole your identity. If you hesitate, if you try to protect her, the ears will indict you as a co-conspirator, and the lender will garnish your wages for the rest of your natural life." The reality of it settled over me like a lead blanket. It was one thing to walk away from my family. It was one thing to let them suffer the consequences of their own incompetence. But filing a criminal police report meant actively sending my mother to federal prison. It meant putting handcuffs on her wrists. "Do it," I said. My voice didn't shake. "Draft the police report. I'll sign it right now." Cora gave a sharp, approving nod. She buzzed her paralegal to start drafting the affidavits. We spent the next 2 hours meticulously documenting every financial abuse I had suffered since I was 14. We built a timeline of my mother's manipulations, Marcus's reckless spending, and the exact moment I severed ties. We were just finishing the final sworn statement when my cell phone vibrated on the glass table. It was Soren, the senior dispatcher from my logistics firm. I picked it up, assuming there was an issue with one of the freight routes. "Hey," Soren said, his voice unusually tight. "Are you coming into the office today?" "I'm dealing with a family emergency, Soren. I told the manager last night." "You need to get down here," Soren said, dropping his voice to a hushed whisper. "There's a guy in the lobby making a massive scene. He's screaming at the receptionist, saying you owe his company $250,000 and he's legally entitled to seize your car." My stomach dropped. What does he look like? Tall, cheap gray suit, sweating a lot. He keeps waving this thick folder of papers around, telling everyone walking into the building that you're a fraud who defaulted on a commercial loan. It was Griffin Calloway, the sleazy loan officer who had been sitting on my parents' couch the night my shoulder was sliced open. He hadn't just approved the forged loan. He had apparently purchased the debt or was acting as the aggressive collection agent for Vanguard Oasis, and he was currently detonating my professional reputation in the middle of my company's lobby. "Do not let him into the secure office area," I told Soren, already standing up from Cora's table. "Call building security. I'm 10 minutes away." I hung up and looked at Cora. She had already gathered the files and was standing up, her expression hardening into absolute steel. "I'm coming with you," she said, grabbing her briefcase. "Let's go meet Mr. Calloway." I walked out to the lobby. Cora was pacing near the windows, talking rapidly into her phone. When she saw my face, she ended the call and walked over. "What happened?" she asked. "I'm suspended. Unpaid." I looked out the glass doors at the bright, unforgiving city. "I have no money, Cora. I have no job. I can't pay your retainer." Cora looked at me for a long time. She didn't offer fake sympathy. "The retainer is the least of your problems right now. If your mother has a fraudulent power of attorney, we don't just have to fight Vanguard Oasis and the ears. We have to find out what else she bought." My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text message. Not from Marcus, not from my dad. It was a picture message from an unknown number. I opened it. It was a photograph of the lease agreement for Marcus's failing streetwear boutique downtown. The commercial space he had blown $120,000 on. I zoomed in on the bottom of the page. The primary leaseholder wasn't Marcus, and it wasn't my parents' landscaping company. It was me. A second text popped up beneath the photo. "This is the property manager for the retail space on 4th Ave. You are 3 months behind on rent. If you don't bring a cashier's check for $24,000 by tomorrow noon, we are holding you personally liable for the remaining 4 years of the commercial lease." I handed the phone to Cora without saying a word. She read the screen, her eyes scanning the text twice before she locked the device and handed it back to me. "They didn't just reclassify the loan," she said, her voice dropping into a low clinical register. "They used your pristine credit to secure the brick-and-mortar location itself. Your mother has essentially built a parallel financial identity in your name." "How?" I asked. The air in the conference room suddenly felt too thin to breathe. "How did she get a commercial lease past a broker without me being there in person?" "A fraudulent power of attorney," Cora replied, snapping her briefcase shut. "If she had Declan Thorne stamp a comprehensive power of attorney, she could walk into any leasing office in Maricopa County and claim you were out of state on business. But that's tomorrow's problem. Right now, we have to deal with the man screaming in your lobby." We took my car. The drive to the logistics firm took 11 minutes, and neither of us spoke a single word. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my forearms ached. Everything I had built over the last 6 months, the clean apartment, the quiet life, the steady paycheck, was being systematically dismantled by a woman I hadn't spoken to since she left me bleeding on her living room floor. When we walked through the glass double doors of the firm, the tension in the lobby was thick enough to choke on. Griffin Calloway was standing near the reception desk. His face flushed a dark, angry red. He was wearing a cheap gray suit that looked too tight across the shoulders, and he was waving a thick manila folder at Soren, who was standing between Griffin and the secure doors leading to the dispatch floor. Two of our freight coordinators were hovering near the break room, openly staring. I don't care if they're in a meeting, Griffin yelled, slapping the folder against his thigh. They owe Vanguard Oasis $250,000. They committed commercial fraud, and I am not leaving until I get a payment schedule or the keys to their vehicle. Mr. Calloway, Cora said. She didn't yell. She didn't even raise her voice, but the absolute authority in her tone made Griffin snap his head toward us. He looked at me, a nasty, triumphant smirk spreading across his sweaty face. There you are, trying to ghost $250,000? You think moving across town makes you invisible? Cora stepped smoothly in front of me before I could open my mouth. My name is Cora Fairfax. I am legal counsel for the individual you are currently harassing, and if you say one more word about my client in this public lobby, I will bury you in civil litigation so deep you won't see the sun until the next decade. Griffin blinked, his smirk faltering for a fraction of a second. I have a signed personal guarantee. Your client is on the hook. I'm well within my rights to pursue collections. You have a forged document, Cora corrected him, stepping closer. She didn't flinch. Originated by a desperate woman and stamped by a corrupt notary named Declan Thorne, who I am currently reporting to the Arizona Secretary of State. You didn't do basic due diligence on a $250,000 disbursement. You saw a perfect credit score and a gullible landscaping company, and you pushed the paperwork through to get your commission. Griffin's face lost some of its color. He looked from Cora to me, the hostility replaced by a sudden, flickering panic. I saw the signature. I saw the notary stamp. You saw a forgery, Cora said coldly. We are heading to the police precinct in exactly 10 minutes to swear out a criminal complaint for identity theft against the perpetrators. Vanguard Oasis Capital is holding a toxic, unenforceable debt, and if you ever show up at my client's place of employment again, I will have you arrested for criminal trespassing and harassment. Do you understand me, Griffin? He stood there, the manila folder suddenly looking very heavy in his hands. He knew she was right. High-risk lenders lived in the gray areas of the law, and the moment a formal police report for fraud was filed, that debt became a total loss. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing against his tight collar. This isn't over, he muttered, though the threat sounded incredibly hollow. He turned and walked out the glass doors, the heavy glass swinging shut behind him. The lobby was dead silent. I looked over at Soren, who was staring at me with a mixture of pity and extreme discomfort. Behind him, the secure door clicked open, and Holt, the regional manager of the firm, stepped out. He looked at the empty spot where Griffin had just been standing, then looked at me. My office, Holt said quietly. Cora gave me a slight nod, signaling she would wait. I followed Holt through the dispatch floor, feeling the eyes of 20 different coworkers burning into the back of my neck. They had all heard it. $250,000. Commercial fraud. Holt closed his office door and leaned against his desk. He was a decent guy, a former long-haul driver who valued quiet competence above everything else. I had never caused him an ounce of trouble. I'm sorry about that, I started, feeling a humiliating heat rise in my cheeks. It's a family issue. My mother stopped, Holt interrupted, holding up a hand. He looked genuinely pained. I don't need the details. I don't want the details. But I can't have a screaming debt collector blowing up my lobby. I can't have federal tax problems bleeding into this firm. We handle sensitive shipping manifests, and our corporate insurance has strict clauses about employee financial liability. I knew exactly what he was going to say before the words left his mouth. I'm suspending you effective immediately, Holt said, looking down at his shoes. Unpaid. Until you can bring me legal proof that this is entirely resolved and your name is completely cleared. Hand in your key card and your company laptop to HR on the way out. I didn't argue. There was no point. My mother had managed to reach across the city and strip away my livelihood without ever picking up the phone. I unclipped my badge from my belt, set it quietly on Holt's desk, and walked out. When I got back to the lobby, Cora took one look at my face and knew. The police station, I said, my voice completely hollow. Now, we drove to the central precinct downtown. The building smelled intensely of industrial floor wax and stale coffee. We waited 45 minutes on hard plastic chairs before a detective named Bastian finally called us into a small, windowless interview room. He looked exhausted, nursing a styrofoam cup of water and clicking a ballpoint pen. But when Cora laid the organized folders on the metal table, the forged IRS returns, the fraudulent Vanguard Oasis loan, the $24,000 retail lease, and the medical records from the urgent care clinic, Bastian stopped clicking the pen. He sat up straight. The dollar amount bumps this out of standard fraud, Detective Bastian said, tracing his finger over the notary stamp. $250,000 on the loan alone, plus federal tax evasion. The IRS is going to want the primary slice of this pie, but we can file the state-level identity theft charges today. You understand what happens when you sign this affidavit? He looked directly at me, not at Cora. If you sign this, it's not a family matter anymore, Bastian said, his voice quiet and completely serious. It's a state matter. I will send uniformed officers to their home and their place of business. They will be placed in handcuffs. There is no taking it back, and there is no dropping the charges later when you feel guilty at Thanksgiving. I thought about my shoulder crashing through the heavy glass. I thought about Marcus sitting in his velvet chair, scrolling through Instagram while I bled. I thought about Holt taking my security badge off his desk. Where do I sign? I asked. He slid the paperwork across the table. I picked up his pen and signed my real name, with my real signature. It felt like cutting an anchor line. We walked out of the precinct into the blinding midday heat. Cora shook my hand on the sidewalk. She promised to send copies of the police report to the IRS agent and the commercial landlord before the end of the day. She told me to go home, lock my doors, and ignore every phone call that didn't come directly from her. I took an Uber her back to my apartment. I didn't have a company car anymore. I didn't have a job. I had $7,000 in my savings account, which had to cover rent, food, and eventually, Cora's massive legal fees. When I walked into my quiet, pristine apartment, the silence didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt suffocating. I put my keys on the counter and looked at the glowing city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. My cell phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, fully expecting to see Marcus's number again, or maybe another threat from the retail property manager. It was my dad. I stared at the screen. My father had always been the passive enabler. He let my mother run the finances, let her run the business, and let her dictate the family dynamics. He had left voicemails over the last 6 months, but he had never called twice in a row. Now, the phone was practically vibrating out of my hand. He called, let it ring until it hit voicemail, and immediately called again. I remembered Cora's instructions to ignore everyone, but there was something frantic about the back-to-back calls that clawed at my chest. I swiped accept and pressed the phone to my ear. Hello, they're taking the trucks, my dad said. His voice was completely broken. He sounded like he was hyperventilating, the words stumbling over each other. They chained the gates to the yard, and they're putting the skid steers on flatbeds. They're taking everything. Dad, slow down. Who is taking the trucks? The feds, he choked out. The ears. There's a woman here with a badge. She said the business accounts are seized. But that's not why I'm calling you. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my forehead against the cool glass of my living room window. Dad, I can't help you. Mom forged my signature. I just filed a police report against her. It's over. No, listen to me, he yelled, a sudden, desperate edge slicing through his panic. I didn't know about the shoe store lease. I swear to God I didn't. But you have to tell me you didn't sign the other paper. Please tell me you didn't sign the paper for the house. My eyes snapped open. The breath left my lungs in a single, painful rush. What paper for the house, Dad? The second mortgage, he whispered, his voice trembling so violently I could barely hear him over the sound of heavy diesel engines roaring in the background on his end. Mom said you co-signed a bridge loan against the equity of our house to keep the landscaping payroll afloat. $400,000. The bank just called my cell. They're initiating foreclosure proceedings because the primary accounts are frozen. $400,000, I repeated, the words tasting like copper in my dry mouth. I didn't know. My dad kept sobbing over the roar of the diesel engines and the heavy clanking of chains. She told me you agreed to help one last time. She showed me the closing disclosure last month. Your name was on the borrower line next to hers. She said it was a temporary bridge loan until Marcus got the store off the ground. Marcus's store is a front for $120,000 bonfire, Dad, and I didn't sign anything. I pressed my hand against the cold glass of the window, trying to anchor myself to the floor as the room spun. She forged my signature. Again, she used the same corrupt notary, Declan Thorne, didn't she? There was a heavy, suffocating silence on the line, save for the frantic shouts of an ears agent inventorying the equipment yard. Declan? My dad finally croaked. Yeah. He came to the house last month. They sat in the kitchen. I thought he was just dropping off a rental invoice for the backhoe. I was at the police precinct an hour ago, Dad. I swore out a criminal affidavit against her for the Vanguard loan. And now I have to go back and add federal mortgage fraud to the file. You need to pack a bag. If the ears is already seizing the trucks, the state police won't be far behind. You can't do this, he screamed, his lifelong passivity completely shattering under the weight of the collapse. She's your mother. You have to call the bank. Tell them you'll assume the payments. You make good money at the logistics firm. You can float this until I get the company running again. I actually laughed. It was a dry, scraping sound in the empty apartment. I don't make good money anymore, Dad. I got suspended this morning because Griffin Calloway showed up at my office screaming about the Vanguard loan. I have nothing. She took everything. You're losing the house, Dad, and Mom is going to federal prison. I hung up. I didn't block him, but I turned the phone on silent and dropped it onto the kitchen counter. I had to call Cora. But first, I needed to see the damage for myself. I walked over to the kitchen island, pulled my laptop toward me, and opened my browser. Maricopa County has public property records online. You can pull the deed history of any parcel if you know the address. I typed in the street name of my childhood home. The search wheel spun. I clicked on the most recent recorded document filed exactly 4 weeks ago. A deed of trust. It wasn't just a second mortgage. The scanned document loaded on my screen, line by brutal line. My mother hadn't just added me as a co-signer to borrow against their remaining equity. She had filed a fraudulent quitclaim deed 3 days before the mortgage origination. She had forged my father's signature, removing him from the title entirely, and then forged my signature to add me as the sole joint tenant with right of survivorship alongside her. She had literally stolen the house from her own husband just to use my pristine credit score as the primary borrower for a $400,000 cash-out refinance. And that money hadn't gone to the landscaping payroll. The landscaping accounts were frozen and empty. The money had vanished. My phone lit up on the granite counter. It was Cora calling. I picked it up on the second ring. Are you sitting down? Cora asked, skipping the professional greeting entirely. I'm looking at the county assessor's website, I said, my voice completely numb. She took my dad off the deed of their house. She put me on it. She pulled $400,000 in cash. It gets worse, Cora said, the rapid rustle of paperwork coming through the speaker. I just got off the phone with the commercial landlord for Marcus's boutique on 4th Ave. I requested the full lease file. Your mother didn't just use a fake power of attorney to sign you as the personal guarantor. What did she do? She used your social security number and the Vanguard loan funds to open a Delaware LLC, Cora said, her tone dead serious. She named you as the sole managing member. That LLC is the primary tenant on the retail space. And according to the landlord's ledger, that LLC has been issuing payroll checks to Marcus for the last 3 months. I gripped the edge of the island so hard my fingernails bit into my palms. You aren't just on the hook for the rent, Cora continued, spelling out the absolute nightmare nightmare I was trapped in. On paper, you are Marcus's employer. You are the sole legal owner of the fraudulent business the Ears is currently investigating. She didn't just frame you for the tax evasion. She built an entire corporate structure to prove you were the mastermind. The finality of the realization hit me, not like a wave, but like a sudden, permanent drop in temperature. I wasn't just being framed. I was being erased, replaced by an LLC and a ledger full of fictional debt. I looked at the screen, at the name of the Delaware entity, Oasis Ventures, managed by me, and realized the only way to kill this ghost was to stop running from the haunting. I didn't call the police again. I called the one person who knew exactly how to dismantle the structure Cora had uncovered. I didn't go back to the federal building. I went to the state registrar's office. I had the documents. I had the proof of the forgery, the notarized timestamps from Declan Thorne's yard, and the bank's own records of the wire transfers that bypassed my actual accounts. I sat in a sterile waiting room for 2 hours, watching a wall clock tick with agonizing slowness. When I finally reached the desk, I didn't ask for help. I placed the file down, the thick folder that contained the map of my mother's betrayal. I didn't look for sympathy. I looked for a witness. I signed the affidavit, the pen feeling heavy in my hand, and watched as the clerk stamped it with a date that would serve as the terminal point for my family's ruin. The following Tuesday, the inevitable arrived. It wasn't the dramatic scene I'd played out in my head. There were no lights, no shouting, just 2 men in plain clothes knocking on the door of the landscaping office, while my father was attempting to load the last of the office equipment into his personal truck. I watched from across the street, sitting in my own vehicle, the windows rolled up against the dry Phoenix heat. I saw my mother come out, her hands fluttering, her face a mask of practiced indignation until one of the men held up the folder. I watched her posture deflate. She looked small, not powerful, not manipulative, just small. She turned her head, scanning the parking lot, and for a single, fleeting second, her eyes locked onto mine across the heat-distorted pavement. I didn't look away. I didn't offer a nod. I simply watched the life she had built on the back of my labor be liquidated in real time. Marcus was brought out 10 minutes later. He looked confused, his designer sneakers scuffing the asphalt as they guided him toward the unmarked car. He still looked like he expected someone to pull up in a luxury sedan and clear the misunderstanding, the same way they'd always cleared his path. When the door shut behind him, the sound was final. I started my car and drove away. The process was long, tedious, and filled with months of depositions and legal filings. Cora was relentless. We didn't just fight the charges. We used the evidence of the forgery to dismantle the LLC, to claw back the personal guarantee from the lender, and to prove, with clinical precision, that I had been a victim of identity theft. The mortgage on the house was declared void, the foreclosure halted as the title was restored to my father, who eventually had to sell the place just to cover the legal fees of his own defense. I moved to a small town 3 hours north, a place where no one knew my name and no one cared about my credit score. I got a job in a warehouse, doing work that had no spreadsheets, no payroll, no budgets. I worked with my hands. I went home to an apartment that didn't have a balcony or a view of a city, just a window that looked out onto a quiet, dusty street. The final piece of mail arrived a year later. It was a letter from a state facility, handwritten in my mother's jagged, cramped script. I held it for a long time, the paper feeling thin and brittle. I didn't open it. I didn't read the pleas for forgiveness, or the excuses, or the attempts to justify the theft of my life. I walked to the kitchen, dropped the envelope into the trash, and walked out the door. I realized then that I didn't want justice in the form of an apology. I wanted the silence. And for the first time in my life, that's exactly what I had. The debt was gone, the fraud was undone, and the people who had used my name like a currency were finally, permanently, out of mine.